Hello and welcome to a bonus episode of the History of the Germans. Today I'm sitting here with Dr. Václav Žůrek, Research Fellow in Medieval Studies at the Czech Academy of Sciences in Prague. And most importantly, he is also the author of a forthcoming biography of our hero, or anti-hero, Karl Charles Karel IV. And the book, amazingly, will be available in English translation under the title Charles IV, Portrait of a Medieval Ruler. Václav, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me and for in this interesting show.
Thank you. So, in the summary of your book, you call Charles IV an untouchable monument in Czech history. So, for us non-Czechs, can you just give us an idea on how present Charles IV still is in the political and mental makeup of Czechia today?
Charles, let's say, governmental achievements and foundational activities in art or architecture, as were the monuments devoted to him, they are inseparable part of the historical consciousness of our days Czechs. The identity of the inhabitants of Czech Republic is very much enshrined in Middle Ages and openly identifies with the kingdom of Bohemia from the Middle Ages. And there is also the similarity and linguistic tradition and so on. And his presence, the presence of Charles IV in the contemporary life of Czech Republic is quite substantial. The name of the oldest university is Charles University. The famous medieval stone bridge in Prague is called Charles Bridge. There are several castles like Karlstein, but others as well. There is a spa town in Karlovy Vary, Karlsbad, named after him. So in short, he's omnipresent in historical memory.
Wow. I can sort of see that. I've been to Prague almost since the early 1980s. And every time I stand on the Charles Bridge and I look around and I see the cathedral and I see the new town and all that, I can completely see that, that admiration, that importance that Charles has for the city of Prague, but also for the Czech people in more broadly. But I guess there's always, a bit of a gap between the perception and the things you physically see and the reality of Charles' actual reign. So maybe if we start a little bit, just get a picture of him, if we can talk a little bit about his early years, about the events and the experiences that shaped him, that are also sort of part of the personality that we see.
Of course, the young Charles, then still Václav, when he came to Paris, so spent 7 years of his youth at the court of the French king, which influenced him greatly, as he was able to observe and experience from close how the great politics is making, and how the representation of the dynasty and of the king is important for the politics. And he used to know the governmental know-how, if we can say it like this. And 7 years in the age from 7 to 14 is an important and formative time for someone, of course. So that's when he was learn how to be king, who used the presentation of his kingdom, of his crown, and of himself as the tool of the politics. And then after the 7 years on the French court, he moved to Italy, northern Italy, when he should take the power of his father and rule quite big region in this very difficult region to rule. And there he was on himself. His father came back to Bohemia, and Charles started to practice the government as still a young man when he was 14. And these two stays, so 7 years in France and then 3 years in Italy, was very important for the formation of his personality, of him as a ruler. And if I can add something, when I talk about this PR, this representation of himself, he then use it a lot. And one of the good example is Vita Karoli, because we are very much informed about his views from this autobiography, narrating only the first 30 years of his life. So only before he was elected the King of the Romans. And it's very clear when we read this Vita Karoli, and especially the time in Italy, that he recounted these experiences when he escaped the poisoning by the divine grace, of course, as the god removed his adversaries from his path. So he was seen as elected to be the king of Bohemia and later the emperor from this time on.
Yeah, I found that quite fascinating, particularly this religious dream where he, being guided by an angel. I'm never quite sure whether these things happen in reality or whether they're just happening in their heads, but definitely that must have been quite a formative experience. But moving on to sort of, the way he's depicted, I mean, trying to get a sort of idea of what he actually physically looked like. Because, we have a lot of pictures of him. We have the statue on the Charles Bridge. We have the frescoes in Karlstein, lots of illuminated manuscripts, etc., etc., in all of which he looks incredibly majestic. But what did he actually really look like, and how did he sort of translate that, his actual physical looks, into the depictions, the way that we see him today?
Yeah, of course, for 14th century, it's difficult to know how someone looks like. But paradoxically, we are capable of learning much more about Charles on the basis of anthropological examination of his skeleton than from the contemporary sources, which is quite interesting, The important thing here is the injury. It happened sometimes in October 3050. And according to this anthropological analysis, Charles suffered a sharp blow to the jaw, most likely as a result of a fall, which caused the breakage of the jaw, including some teeth and injury to the spine. So he was confined to a bed for a relatively long time, and but received apparently a very good care for this 14th century. And the doctor succeeded to fix his teeth, and then he was able to eat, of course. This is the most important thing, of course, to survive. But the jawbone was broken on several places, and it's clear that it could be seen afterwards, So from the medical findings, also he was restricted in his movements, and the face was marked by a scar. But this is not what we can see on these illuminations, pictures from the Middle Ages. So it seems that there was some kind of official portrait of Charles IV, which was used. And it was not adapted in the time. So he was still painted in his 50s as in his 60s, with this brown hair, long beard, and no injuries at all. So this was some kind of official portrait for the larger public. The thing is also that or if you go to Karlstein to cathedral in Prague, you can see some of few portraits from his time, really, and many of them are later, and they are copies of these official portraits.
And I looked it up on the French illuminated manuscripts from his visit. That again is the same image, right?
Yeah, sometimes, but there are some other copies when there is really some old man with long white hair, and this is very different Charles.
Yeah, that's true. The other thing that always struck me when I was preparing the show was his fascination with religious objects, with relics. I mean, there are all these sort of fun stories of him sewing up the bones of saints. How do these things fit into his political representation, and where does this sort of borderline lies between use it politically, but also does he actually believe in efficacy to these relics?
Well, it's of course very difficult to say, but based on many information we have and about the reign of Charles IV, we can say that he personally was a pious man. But he paid much attention to the symbolical niveau of communication, let's say. Paid great attention to political and religious symbolism. And therefore, when he began to aspire to imperial crown, he started to collect relics. And he was very eager to have a big collection, which he had finally. He spent a lot of his reign on the move across the Europe, so mostly he collected or get these relics in situ somewhere and then bring it back to Prague. Part stayed in Prague and in the cathedral, and some part of these relics went to Karlstein, his new residence, not far from Prague. And this was not enough to have these relics. So he established public festivity, the so-called display of relics. Every year, one week after Easter, there was a wooden tour on the biggest square in Prague, in the new town. And there were displayed these relics and commented. And thousands of people went every year to Prague. So you can see that this is not only about the symbolics of the politics or religious symbolics, but it's also about money, because all these people came to Prague. It was a big festivity. So it was also for his capital very important from the financial point of view.
And it probably helped to bring people to actually move into the new town. Given the size of it, he needed, and we were just after the plague, so getting people to move into this new place, the relics might have had a significant impact there and being particularly helpful.
And also, Charles was the member of the Luxembourg dynasty. He was king of Bohemia, but also he was king of the Romans and later emperor. And he moved his seat to Prague, which is quite a periphery of the Holy Roman Empire at the time. So he needed also to make the city more interesting, make people come here as a visit or to move to Prague, of course. And not only the people from the Czech kingdom, but also from other places.
Absolutely. The other side of it, or the other thing that Charles is famous for, is his sort of collection of crowns. There's the crown of St. Wenceslas that he commissioned, but then he got himself the Imperial crown, he got himself the Iron Crown of Lombardy, he even got himself the crown of the Arelat. I mean, he's the first emperor to get the full set. And they also play an important role in his representation and in the way that he presents himself as the emperor, right?
Right, because if we talk about some representation of power in the Middle Ages, we can see it on two levels. One is the literature, so that someone is commenting or narrating some coronation or something, and the other one is the performance, of course. Charles loved the performance, and so he was 6 times crowned, which is the medieval record as far as I know. But he organized also, more than 10 coronations of other members of his family, his son, his 4 wives. You know, he went to Rome again after his 15 years after his coronation, just to make her wife to be crowned empress. Well, of course, this was not so easy. There was also the other important things in play. But he really liked to present himself like someone who is crowned and oined, which was also important, of course. And this was some kind of performance of this Dei Gratia Rex, so by the king by the divine grace. And a good example here is how much attention he paid to the symbolics. Is that he was in 1346. He was crowned the king of the Romans, but not in Aachen, but in Bonn, because Aachen refused him. He was only anti-king, and he was refused. So 3 years after, when he was a real king of the Romans, the only one respected, he did it again. So he went to Aachen and remake coronation on the proper place with the proper crown in order to make it right.
Yeah. And it's also interesting that, prior to Charles IV, the main thing of the imperial regalia was the Holy Lance. If you had the Holy Lance, that practically give you 80%, and then even if you have a fake crown, it's not so important. But with Charles, it's this whole idea of crowns being the most important element that really comes from him, or at least for the context of the Holy Roman Empire. Is that right?
Yeah, we can say it this way. And also, as you can see, he established this lance of the Bohemian crown as a political entity based on the crown, and on the St. Wenceslas crown, of course, on the symbolic level. And also, this was a big festivity when he get finally this lands and crowns and this whole imperial treasure from Wittelsbach. And they moved to Prague. And since this moment, he started to think, okay, when they should be preserved in Prague or maybe in Karlstein. They finally ended in Karlstein. But every year, 1 week after Easter, they came to Prague to be shown to the people. And remember, I am the emperor and I have all these, I have this treasure. So we are under the God's protection, let's say. But you are right, the symbolics of the crown was very present during his reign.
And then, you already mentioned that a little bit, but the other way to represent yourself is through literary work. And I have probably not done as much in the podcast as I probably should. And I think you said he produced as many documents as the entirety of all Bohemian rulers before. So how did that play in his representation?
This, of course, plays a very substantial role in his representation, especially in the next generations and even until today, because we are informed about the 14th century a lot from these documents from Charles' era. So we have part of his archive because he established rulers' archives of the Czech kingdom, and we have a lot of chronicles. He make several people coming to Prague to his court to write and chronicle. 2 substantial chronicles about the older history of the Czechs, and then of course also the chronicle of his age to make his memory under his control. So he was a ruler who controls the image of his reign for the future generations. And what is quite interesting and what I try to show in my book is that this PR from 14th century is still working. We can saw it in 2016, how much from his own words were quoted during this 700 birthday, jubilee of birthday, and they were politicians quoting this medieval verses or phrases from Vita Caroli in order to show how he is still an ideal ruler for today, which, to be honest, it's not the case. Of course, the Middle Ages is quite not so well. It was another time, and we should respect it and read it with these lenses.
Yeah. I found quite interesting that this injury that he had in the 1350s, that is not mentioned in any of the Bohemian chronicles. It just doesn't appear, which presumably was because it was a bit embarrassing falling down the stairs and breaking your jaw rather than having some sort of battle injury. So he really sort of controlled it to quite a level of minutia to make sure the right story gets distributed.
Mm-hmm. And you're right. The control apparently was very present. We have a chronicle of Příběh Pulkava of Radenín, who wrote a history of the Czech since the flood until his time, and we know about 6 versions of this chronicle, and you know that it was not only because of some corrections from the Charles, but also they found a new chronicle somewhere, so they should insert it in the new information, insert it in the main text. And when Charles became Margrave of Brandenburg, he brought a Brandenburg chronicle to Prague. And the author of the history of the Czechs should insert the information about Brandenburg, because now it's a part of the lands of the Bohemian crown. So it's a part of our identity, of our political entity. So we need this identity building text. So, and this is the chronicle. And not only chronicle, we have a lot of other literary texts from Charles's reign in many languages, actually, in Czech, in German, in Latin. So there was some multilingual experience, and we even don't know exactly how he spoke. We know that he was polyglot and spoke all of these languages, which is quite clear because he spent 7 years in France, 3 years in Italy. The Latin was important. The Czech and German was present already in Prague. And I always say that I think that he spoke with his wives and his smaller court in German, because this was the language of his father. So and it was also the language of big part of the inhabitants of Prague, in the old town of Prague. And also he was the king of the Romans, so these people from the empire were present at his court. So I think that the German was the first language spoken in Prague. But of course, the Czech has a big symbolical importance. There was a communication with Czech nobility, and there was also some sort of the official support for Czech translations of the Bible, Czech translation of religious texts. So there was also this different importance of the Czech language on his court.
Yeah, and I mean, he did sponsor Czech priests, I think, in Aachen or some other major monastery. And if I'm not totally mistaken, he also insisted that all the electors would learn the Czech language, so that actually deliberations amongst the electors could have actually been held in Czech.
Yeah, it's connected with the thing that he thought that knowledge of the language is important for the governance. So he prescribed it in Golden Bull. The electors should know all four languages of the empire. So not only German, but also Latin, Italian, and some Slavic language. It's written Slavic, but it means some Czech, I think. But because you should understand the language of the people you are ruling.
Yeah. Fantastic. I mean, we've now talked quite a lot about the self-representation of Charles IV as essentially the all-controlling empire with the sort of direct line to the Almighty. But the reality, how do you see it? I think he's much more of a politician, a smart guy who uses diplomacy rather than force, uses representation rather than military means to achieve his objectives. He's more of a wily, maybe not quite as morally upstanding person as he presents himself.
There is the word pragmatic, which is used a lot with Charles IV. We can see that he was able to change the direction of his politics in a very short time. He was able to improvise. And when he wanted to be the only respected king of the Romans in 1346-47, he changed his allies twice a week. So this is not someone who this is something, not very stable, but he was very improvising, and he was also able to change his mind even in long time projects, like in North Bavaria, when he tried to found a new part of the land of the Bohemian crown, and then he changed it for a new project because there was a possibility to get Brandenburg, and Brandenburg is big. There is a elector's vote, so this is more important for the dynasty, because the dynasty is the most important thing, of course. And from this point of view, when it's necessary to change the politics, let's make it. The other thing is that he spent a lot of his reign in depth. He had never enough money, because the first project of his reign, so the election of the anti-king against Louis, was so expensive that he started with it, and he never came out from this state.
So he was still carrying over debt payments from that time.
Yeah, well, because not only, but every other project was expensive. The imperial crown, this whole activity around you need a lot of money to go to Italy. Then, of course, well, Charles was a ruler who wanted the peace in the Central Europe, no war, because probably economical thought that no war means that the economic is in a good shape. And but sometimes you have to pay to avoid the war, and that's also the way of his reign.
I was quite fascinated when I sort of looked at his first and his second journey to Rome, and he goes in, he makes a deal with Venice against Milan. He gets before Milan. He makes a deal with Milan against Florence. He goes to Florence and makes a deal with Florence against Milan. How does he manage that? How do people not go around and say, well, this guy is clearly totally unreliable. He tells me this, and then 2 weeks later he does the opposite. And it's a pattern. It's been going on since the beginning. How does he manage that?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think he learned it in Italy, especially because this is also quite typical for this time for northern Italy. The quick changes of the allies and alliances, and maybe he was smart enough to know with whom he could do it and when. But sometimes he made a wrong choice, because on the way from the second coronation in Rome, from the coronation of his wife in Rome, he stayed in Parma, I believe, and he made a wrong choice. And there was some small revolution in town, and it was very difficult for him and his retinue to go out from the city finally. So sometimes he make a wrong choice and can go in danger.
But on balance, I mean, I find this is his genius, is this ability to weed his way through all these unbelievably complex politics.
Yeah, what is maybe the thing is that he insisted very much on politics done in person. So he negotiated a lot himself. That's why he was on the move, not only in the empire, but also in Avignon with the Pope, in Rome, and then at the end of his life, even went to Paris, which was quite difficult in his shape. But he insisted on it, and I think he should have some charisma or something like this, and he was able to, speak all these languages, and was maybe able to influence the people.
We look at the achievements in his life. And obviously, for Bohemia, there were these enormous achievements of the rebuilding of Prague, but also just the kingdom was obviously in terrible shape when he took it over from his father, who literally couldn't be bothered. But the one big project, the Majestas Carolina, the attempt to create a new constitution for the kingdom, that ultimately failed. So how did that happen? How did he get into this situation where, on the one hand, he does all these improvements, he establishes this incredible outside personality, but then when push comes to shove, and he really needs to get something done, the barons are strong enough to oppose him. How did that happen?
Yeah, there's the saying that nobody is a prophet at home. And this nobility around him in his entourage was very important for him, because what we should say is that Bohemia, the kingdom of Bohemia, was very rich in this time, especially thanks to silver mines. So to be capable to pay all this politics on the European scale, he needed the cooperation of the Czech nobility. He needed the cooperation of the powerful men in not only in Bohemia, but also in Silesia and so on, in Moravia. And the opposition was so strong, but it was a principal opposition, because the Majestas Carolina is a very good legal code. There is very many smart things, even from the point of view of the sustainability of the preservation of nature, sources, and so on. But the principle was that the written legal code is against the right of the nobility to find the law. So the processes of the finding the law, it means to decide what is right and what is not right. This was something what the nobility wanted not to lose. And so apparently it was also in difficult situation just after the coronation in Rome, when he was not in Bohemia and so on. So the opposition was so strong that he should decide, and quickly, like I said, he improvised and said, okay, I'm burned, I'm sorry, the codex is burned, I have no copy, so let it go. And there was no other mention during his reign. Let's not talk about it.
Yeah. And I mean, the other side of his reign is the empire. And, in the German perspective, in the German story, he's often depicted as, the father of Bohemia, but the stepfather of the empire. And, to a degree, you can sort of see it. You can see, he hollowed out the resources that any of his successors would have, pawned all the imperial cities and castles and tolls. He gave enormous amount of power to the electors in the Golden Bull. So do you think it's fair to see him as somebody who largely responsible for what's perceived as the weakness of the Holy Roman Empire because he preferred Bohemia?
It's difficult to say, because my position is, of course, much more Bohemian-centered and focused. And I think it's also based on the myth of these great emperors from the 11th, 12th century, these Sauls and Stauffens, and then there is this no big emperor, but and it's interesting because that's in Germany, in the history books, you can see that there is really no word about Charles, or quite not positive, let's say. And what is true is that he changed, of course, the way how the king of the Romans or the emperor ruled in the Holy Roman Empire. And of course, he was quite rich because of being the Czech king and because of having these resources from outside, let's say. But, well, the king of Bohemia was not really outside, but there was no direct authority of the king of the Romans in Bohemia. So this was the resource which can be used by king of the Bohemia, let's say Charles or his son, but not by another ruler who comes after him. But still, I think that with the Golden Bowl, it was not only the support of the power of the electors, but also it made some system which continues to work for centuries afterwards. Well, given that it was mostly ceremonial, but still. And also, I think that the idea of the empire survived also thanks to his support of this idea, because he wanted to be emperor, of course. And if you go to Aachen nowadays, and there is this statue of the Saint Charlemagne and you can see the nice crown, which was given to the statue by Charles IV, you can see, okay, it was the idea to be emperor, and the existence of the empire was very important to him.
Yeah. Maybe last question. So if we try to sort of sum it all up, is Charles IV a PR genius, but underneath more of a flawed politician? Or was he, as some people in Czech Republic say, the best Czech ruler ever?
I don't know. I'm a professional historian. I should not say these things, but I think that we can see his reign also as an inspiration from the point of view that if you are doing some politics with a direction to support the learning and arts, avoid the war, and let the people live in calm but stable conditions, and if you are able to make your kingdom a little bit more cosmopolitan, so make people come with their abilities and ideas and so on, you can be seen as a successful ruler after all.
Yeah, I mean, even compared to many other rulers who spent their time warring endlessly in Italy with absolutely zero positive outcome, concept of sort of trying to preserve some sort of peace and stability in the empire is, I think, extremely commendable. It's almost, it's a little bit modern. I don't think medieval rulers prior to that put as much emphasis on, preserving peace as he had. So, yeah, I'm I wouldn't call him the greatest ruler ever, certainly not. But I walk away with quite a positive take on him. When I started out, I probably had a somewhat less positive perspective on him. So, yeah, he's a fascinating personality in any event.
Yeah, he's a fascinating personality, and we are very much informed about his life. That's also one of the differences with another rulers from the 14th century. We have a lot of sources, and this is also important. And I would say that what is for me quite typical is really this eagerness for stability and peace, but also the foundational activity, because a lot of these monuments, schools, some university, new town of Prague, castles and everything, and this is something what survive.
Yeah,
and if you lose or win some battle there, this is not what survive. But when you found a university, which is still there, this is something what we can. And there are monuments we can touch from the 14th century. That's also some part of this historical identity of the people living there.
Yeah, fantastic. So, very, very last question. Your book, when does it come out? Where can I get it? And the title again.
Yeah, so the title is Charles IV, The Portrait of the Medieval Ruler. It will be published in autumn this year, and because it will be published by the Prague publisher together with Chicago University Press, it should be available on the Amazon or any other worldwide opportunities to buy it.
Thank you so much. That's been absolutely fantastic. And listeners, I hope you go out and get the book. I mean, I've read excerpts of it. I think it is exceptionally well written. It's great fun to read. And the content is, I hope, as you've noticed from this interview, is incredibly fascinating and sheds new light on this fascinating personality. And with this episode, we have arrived at the end of this season. It has taken us all the way from the death of the Emperor Frederick II in 1250 to, well, effectively 1378. So the next century we're going to need to tackle promises to be at least as exciting as this one, as we go and look at the very beginnings of the Reformation, the return of the House of Habsburg to frontline politics. And as always, I will take about 2 to 3 weeks break before the next season starts to prepare. I hope to see you guys all on the other side.